So Reform Councillor Laila Cunningham was on GB News claiming that Labour is implementing socialism to Navarra's Michael Walker.
It's never been done before outside of an emergency. This is the first time. Labour, like you said, is meant to be progressive and fair and here for the people. This is not, basically they don't trust the voters and they're running scared. See, I always thought socialism and authoritarianism would come with a revolution, you know, with a manifesto, but you're seeing it bit by bit. Regulation here, small push here, an extra tax here, a digital ID here, a bit of cancelling of jury trials here, an online safety bill. Yeah. It's bit by bit, and it's a slow creep, no one realises, and slowly the government controls way more than you ever wanted them to, and you're giving them way more of your money than you wanted to, and you can't even vote them out.
Laila is utterly clueless. She has no idea what she's talking about. She doesn't understand the definition of socialism. And I think it's so difficult to have meaningful debates when political opponents either lie or have zero understanding of basic definitions. Laila, in that clip, is rambling like a drunk person. I mean, she starts off by talking about taxes. Somehow that's socialism. Then she mentions digital IDs. That's supposedly socialism. Then abolishing juries. She finally says you can't vote Labour out. I mean, you can at the next general election. Too many people seem to think that socialism is when the government does stuff, and the more the government does, the more socialista it is.
Socialism is when the government does stuff. And it's more socialism the more stuff it does. And if it does a real lot of stuff, it's communism.
People like Laila are pushing this. None of this has anything to do with socialism. The reason why people push false narratives about socialism is because they don't understand what capitalism means, the system they say they support. So when you can't define something against your own beliefs because you're unsure what your beliefs are, then ultimately you're going to be clueless on what all of this means. So, what is socialism? The most basic definition of socialism is a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. So since that's a very basic definition, you're going to have those that misinterpret it or flat out lie. People on the right will take that meaning and say, okay, socialism is when the economy and businesses are government owned, because they conflate collective ownership as the same as the state. Now, part of the reason is that, I don't know, when we talk about public services being nationalised, we often call it public ownership, not state owned. Now, it's state owned. Now, for me, I would consider public and collective different. I mean, something that's out in the public doesn't mean that we all collectively actually own it, whether it's a public toilet or statues or whatever. Yes, it's in a public space, but do you or I actually physically own it? No, we don't. Neither is it owned by a specific person or company unless it's, outsourced. However, I can see how many might conflate the state and the public. Therefore, maybe we're not helping the cause by saying that, rail should be brought into public ownership when it has no democratic oversight. However, the main point that people need to understand is that different economic systems are not defined between governments and private. They are determined by employer and employee relations. The government still acts like an employer. So if you were to nationalize everything, you haven't changed the dynamic between the worker and the boss. Now, most people look to the USSR and call it socialist. It was never socialist. It was state capitalist. Now, I can hear people saying, well, you're only calling it capitalist because it's authoritarian and it wasn't the socialist utopia that you'd like it to be. You're just changing the definition. No, the USSR did not change the employee and employer dynamic. The state was your boss, no different to a CEO or directors controlling the business. Watch this clip from Richard Wolff.
Stalin declares in 1930-31, this is socialism. Lenin, dead by that time, would have, and probably did, turn over in his grave. No, he would have said, what we have is state capitalism. The state has become the capitalist. And that's important, and that's good that we did that. That's what the revolution accomplished, and that was great. But now the task was to transform, and you, Stalin, you didn't transform, you just declared, when the state is in charge, we got socialism. Wow. from being the means to the transition, seizing the state became the transition. From the means, it became the end. We have socialism because the government has taken over, even though the relationships between the government running the industry and the mass of people is not that different from the relationship of the private individuals who used to occupy those positions in relationship to the mass of the working people.
So looking at the standard socialist definition, collective is the most important part of it. Us, the workers owning production. It's about democratic participation. If the government nationalizes everything, where's the democratic will of its workers? There isn't any. So what is a socialist economy? Well, of course, there's different ideas, but broadly, the economy is democratically owned through the firm or through companies or corporations. Things such as worker co-ops. Now, they differ on how they work, typically depending on size. Smaller businesses could be direct co-ops. The workers own the business, they collectively make decisions, whereas massive corporations wouldn't be able to run as a full-blown cooperative, but that's where you have workers on boards. They can provide a voice for the workers. You can have elected management, for example. I mean, Germany has many policies over there where businesses have to have 50% of the board members given to its workers. I mean, socialism, if you think about it, is very simple. It's freedom and democracy in the one place we didn't democratize. The one place which is the most important aspect of our lives, the workplace. Voting for a party every 5 years doesn't bring much change because we rely on others to make the change. Socialism is about handing power to workers. I mean, you can't vote for a different government and transform your life. You can't even vote for a different government and, they can boost your wages. They can do certain things. Of course, backing unions is one, which is collective power. Or they can change taxes and make them more progressive or cut them or raise them. But taxes isn't socialism. Now, socialism is seen as scary to a lot of people, but that's by design. It's made out to be more radical than what it actually is. I mean, worker co-ops literally exist today. I used to be in one. Europe's largest co-op, Mondragon, has up to 80,000 employees. In fact, studies show that worker co-ops are more successful as startups than traditional businesses. Socialism is not anti-business or anti-money or anti-market. It's changing the way businesses make decisions. When they're made with democratic participation, you get better results. For example, how many times have you seen decisions made from the above by people you've never met? They're making decisions based on figures or chasing the maximum amount of profit, regardless if it's good for the worker, the consumer, or even the business. Happens all the time. Say you're a worker on the front line, you're a shop assistant, and you've got CEOs making decisions, especially from someone who's never worked in retail. They've never worked on the bottom line, and they're making decisions, and you can see how wrong that decision is. You are an expert on the shop floor compared to the CEO who's, sometimes they never even had a minimum wage job in their life. Now imagine your voice mattered. Imagine you had a say in the very shop you worked in. You know better. You know customers better. How many times have you worked in a shop, it's really busy, and you're the only member of staff, customers are waiting, the shop is a mess, and you can't split yourself into three. And you ask yourself, why can't we just bloody hire more staff? Now, for management or even the CEO at the top, their incentive is to keep expenditure as low as possible whilst trying to keep profits high. Their job is to serve their shareholders. Shareholders are only interested in maximum return on their investment. They don't care about you on the shop floor. They don't care about the customers who are getting annoyed because there's massive queues. Shareholders want money. CEOs' jobs are to keep them happy. Therefore, there is a direct conflict of the needs from the bottom line. Whereas hiring more staff is better for you, it's better for the store. The store's a mess, more staff can clean it up, and it's better for customers. In fact, oftentimes it's better for the business as a whole. I mean, more staff, they can attend more customers, there's more potential sales, for example. Sometimes spending more money can yield better returns, but the role of management is quick profits, not always the long-term health of a business. The only people who stand to lose in a socialized economy are the mega rich. Their wealth is off the back of the workers. There's vested interest in never having an economy that puts workers in the driving seat. Now, there have been those on the right who do understand what socialism is, so they've had to recalibrate their arguments. You'll hear more and more of this line. Under capitalism, you are free to start worker co-ops. No one's stopping you. But under socialism, capitalist businesses won't be allowed. So which one seems to be a fairer system? And that's a really good gotcha. If someone says that in a debate and you haven't got an answer, it makes you look stupid. And people are like, well, they got a point. But because it's a gotcha, it sounds really good, but it ignores the current dynamics we live in. Global capital is extremely powerful. Capital dominates government. So even though one would say, well, it's perfectly legal to start a co-op, it doesn't mean it's easy. There's nothing wrong with having public policy that incentivizes collective ownership. There's also education, right? Most people don't know what socialism is. I mean, you can't expect an explosion of socialist enterprises when we still have people like Laila Cunningham saying socialism is when government. So it's important to grow the consciousness of what socialism actually is. It's an uphill fight against capital. Of course, this is the first stage of socialism, which is market socialism. Then there's more radical elements such as mass decommodification, and then transitioning to a stateless, classless, moneyless society, i.e. communism. But that's a different story. The point being, communism or mass decommodification is radical. And I'm not saying it's bad, by the way. A lot of it is pretty based, but it is radical. Whereas early socialism really isn't radical at all.